Back again for another short tutorial video. It's been a minute, but trying to get back into it. Been sick for about a week and a half now, just sort of off and on. It was pretty bad last week, and then it's just been following me into this week as well. But I've been doing some more work, and there's just something I noticed in my workflow that I thought might be useful or applicable to more people. And for those of you who don't know, I shoot on a micro four thirds camera, and what that means is the sensor is smaller than that of a full frame. Because of that smaller sensor size, it has less area to receive light, and therefore it shoots suboptimally compared to a full frame or a larger censored camera in lower lighting conditions due to its small sensor size. It's a little tricky to understand, but basically when you put a micro four thirds lens on a micro four thirds camera, it's the equivalent on a full frame camera of double its numbers when it's on that micro four thirds camera. So if you got like a full frame lens, you put it on a micro four thirds camera, the crop, the smaller size of the micro four thirds sensor, would then affect that lens by having it function as if all of its values, e.g. aperture and focal length, were doubled. I hope that's a pretty rudimentary description. I hope you were able to understand that from my very brief rant there. But yeah, essentially my camera is a micro four thirds. It makes it much less capable in low lighting conditions. And I've been shooting a lot of DJ sets lately, and nightclub stuff, and parties, and bits and pieces like that, which all have pretty abysmal lighting conditions to some degree. And this event in particular had a very poor lighting setup. Not for the attendance, obviously, but from a shooting perspective, the DJ booth was all the way back in this corner under this staircase that sort of goes up from behind the bar over there, and there was one light on the floor behind this guy here, behind the DJ, pointing up at the ceiling. So it's constantly, your subject is constantly not only backlit but lit from beneath, so it's really difficult to even get a solid silhouette because there's no light directly behind them. It's just sort of bouncing off this wall here. And so that was really interesting for me to have to deal with. And as a result, I have a lot of poor photos. This is the example I'm going to be using here. I've already done a base edit on it, as you can see. So it's not, that's what it was straight out of camera. Obviously, it's super blurry. I had to shoot with a much slower shutter speed than I would have appreciated to, and the subjects were all moving. So this one in particular is quite blurry and bad, and I've done a little rough edit on it initially. But what I want to go over here today is how I repurpose photos that you wouldn't normally use. What I do to my low quality, slightly out of focus or really noisy photos, so that I still can include some of them in my deliverable, whether that be to help fill out the amount of photos I'm delivering, or just to add some stylistic contrast to the bulk of my work and my edits. And it's pretty simple. I'm going to keep it short, but basically all I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this photo, and there's a couple different variations of this, and I'll just apply whichever one I feel like benefits the particular image I'm working with the most. But in this case, because it's blurry, I'm just going to go all in, and I'm going to go for like a 35mm grain, black and white, retro style photo. And that way, with the amount of grain and noise I'm going to add in and the lack of color, it's going to still not be in focus. Obviously, I cannot fix the fact that I have missed focus on the shot, or it is blurry because of my slow shutter speed, but I can make it look more intentional, and then the photo may still be usable to some degree. So I'm going to slap that into black and white. I'm going to crop it a little bit. I'm going to scroll all the way down. I'm going to pump the crap out of my grain. I turn off the denoise because I don't want that. I want more grain. I'm going to recenter that a bit, and then I'm going to go into clarity. Absolutely pump the clarity. Absolutely pump the texture. Maybe not quite on the texture, but something like that. And then I'm going to adjust this overexposure here in the highlights and pull those down. Put the shadows up so we have that nice exposure in his face. Pull the whites down so that I don't do much overexposure there. Up with the general exposure a little bit. Up with the contrast. a little bit, down with the blacks a little bit. I'm just trying to create contrast between this black and white so it's not such a flat image without underexposing his face, which is in a shadow because all of these photos were black backlit, which is again the problem with that lighting setup for me from an artistic perspective, something like that. And obviously this is still not perfect. The lighting is pretty poor. It would work a lot better on a better lit photo. For example, I've done this one similarly without the noise. It is out of focus here, but it was pretty tack sharp, almost tack sharp on his beard there, and his chain, you can see, is reasonably sharp. So I've just done that in normal black and white, and that's sort of drawn the eye away from focusing on the fact that it's really just a slightly blurry photo. But yeah, that's how I would do it. That's how I'd do it. I'd go and I'd lead into that 35mm grain, that vintage aesthetic, and really aggressively push for pretty solid amounts of contrast and detail. Overuse the clarity and the texture to try to help me or support me in achieving this style and create more grain and more noise, and lean into that aesthetic. There's variations of that. So for example, this one here, I did something similar, but I just didn't go quite as crazy with the noise and the texture. And then this one here, I've just left. They're pretty much the same image. I've left just normal because it was already fine. Occasionally I will keep the denoise and I will add grain on top. I'll see if I can find an example here. That's not an example. Yeah, so for example here, because the denoise made it look really unnatural, I decided and opted to add grain on top of the denoise to try to bring back, because it was noisy anyway and I have enough similar images here, I'm just choosing to stylize this one in a way that attempts to bring back or bring in a little bit of that vintage feel without leaning into it as hard as I have done in other images. And you get this really lovely grain aesthetic over the top, but not to the extent of the other ones where things are already super blurry, like the chain here, and it's you're going all the way in. Yeah, as you can see, there's grain, but like you still have a relatively well focused image. Like this was a decent image to begin with. It's just his nose was out of focus, so I went for this aesthetic instead. Anyway, I hope that helps some of you, any of you, when you're thinking about what or how to edit your photos and what to do when you have a lot of poor images, or maybe you haven't gotten enough images, you feel, because so many of them are not up to the quality that you would consider appropriate for giving a client. This would be my recommendation to you. See what images you can use and repurpose still, and try to shape those mistakes or poor results into something that looks, in hindsight, from a client perspective, like an intentional choice, like an artistic choice, and that gives them some more range or some more stylistic options. And yeah, I've had some really good feedback from this sort of thing. I think a lot of people, at least especially in this party space, really appreciate having a couple of photos with this aesthetic, and it means that I always have enough photos to deliver, even if I only get, out of a couple hundred photos, if I only get a couple angles, 2 or 3 angles, and I only get 10 good sharp photos, I can then add I could double that. I could add another 10 photos that were poor or blurry or underexposed, and just lean into this noisy aesthetic. I do it a lot with underexposed images, because when you crank up the exposure, you introduce a lot of noise. So for example, something like this, there's one over here that would be a good example of this. This one here, super underexposed, right? Super dark. If I pull up that exposure to where I'd want it, it's super grainy already. So all I'm going to do is throw that in the black and white, pull up the contrast, pull up the highlights, go down here, pull up the clarity and the texture. This one I should not add grain on because it's already very grainy. I'm still gonna denoise it because it's too grainy for my taste like that. And I think if I throw a denoise on here and I maybe just tone down that denoise a little bit to like a 40, and then I add a little bit of grain on top, and then I go up here and I lower the blacks down so that I'm not getting extra noise in the shadows, lower those whites a little, and then I crop, it's gonna be bang. Now, even though I want her hand in it actually. Now, even though that was a super poor image to begin with, I have managed to turn it into something that, and obviously mileage may vary on this, and you you are entitled to have a different opinion, but that I would consider a quote-unquote stylized shot, that I would still be comfortable giving to a client and having them use, because it does not look like I have accidentally taken a poor photo. It looks like I intended to edit something towards a specific aesthetic on purpose, and I don't think that reflects poorly on my work or my portfolio or my ability as a photographer. Yeah, cool. So if you've enjoyed this, consider letting me know. I love to hear everybody's feedback on these little videos, and I hope I have been able to help or provide insight on or educate somebody here today. And follow along for future videos if you'd like, but have a wonderful rest of your day no matter what, and I will see you in the next one.